many things that they have to hold themselves accountable to, not the least of which have some semblance of continuity when it comes to their characters. So you're like, I don't like that. I'm not going to buy it. And lo and behold, it shows up, and they're like, oh, we'd better not do that. And what's best is that they are no longer just, um, out there on their own. They actually have people that they're answerable to now, which is great.
I boomered it hard. We've been talking for like 40 minutes without me being live.
You're not live?
I am now because YouTube is so stupid. Like I click go live, I click stream on fucking OBS, and no, I didn't click live. This is so
It's all good.
stupid. Yeah,
As long as you're
we can keep
recording.
talking. I don't stream and record, which I should probably start doing. So for the people who aren't here for the first 40 minutes, we talk about having proper art influences. And sadly, in comics, that's reading the old stuff. At least,
And I think,
at least for this panel's 2 cents.
well, I think, what do you call it? A handful of things that looking now and looking back now and having a more critical eye towards what's working and what's not. A lot of it really, and this is a pretty big umbrella to put things under, but a lot of it has to do, as a lot of it has to do with like professional conduct, right?
Oh yeah.
And there's, I don't think people hold that in as high regard as they should. Everything from like monthly books, understanding your characters and the stewardship that goes beyond that, right? Understanding that there's a fan base that are incredibly loyal and also very forgiving of mistakes that you make because they really just want that book to succeed as best as they can. I'm not being overly optimistic. I'm one of those people that sits back and goes like, I really hope that that works itself out. um, but when you don't have that, when you don't have the tent pole of professionalism as one of the key pillars of how you conduct business, things have a tendency to degrade very quickly. You know, not just in the way you present your product, not just the way you present your books, but also the individuals that you allow to play in your sandbox, right?
Yeah, Zach has this saying, I mean, it's not his, but I've heard it from him the most, where
Yeah,
A people hire other A people, but B people will hire C people, and those people will hire D people, which is something that
I've
I
never
think
I've never heard of that before, but I understand the spirit of it, and it makes a lot of sense.
I know, right?
Um,
And we even
I
had
don't I
Sean
don't
Gordon
know
Murphy like
why.
a couple of years ago
Yeah,
tweet and go like, I don't think editors are actually editing. I think they're just being like glorified schedule apps. And people
I don't
got
think that he's
pissed.
wrong. Well, Sean's an incredibly polarizing guy, and he set himself up to be vilified. Not just through that particular tweet, but obviously in the history of him being a creator. But there are times, and I don't necessarily agree with everything that he says, but there are times when I believe he's 100% accurate, and I've been on the other end of the editorial office in which I've spoken to editors, former editors from both of those mainstream places, and they'll never publicly agree to it, but they're saying exactly the same thing that Sean is, which is, your calendar jockey, just making sure that everything gets fit through a particular pipeline so those books go out. There's no really creative vision that's happening, you know. And I think people protest really, really hard because somewhere in there, as harsh as that criticism is the nugget of truth, you know?
Yeah, and I think that's why they protest so hard. Because
Yeah.
they know that's the truth, and truth usually hurts, especially when it's on that level.
Listen, successful people, right, rarely have to work that hard to prove that the work that they're doing is legitimate, you know?
Oh yeah.
Like if it came down to like, Apple computers suck. Let's say, right? Like Apple as a program, as a manufacturing tech company, as well as an operating system company, those guys freaking suck, right? Apple doesn't go out there and like we don't suck. I don't take offense to it. They just go like,
Yeah.
well, here's what
Here's
our
the new iPhone.
billion gazillion dollar company looks like, and it reeks of success. So yeah, but we may suck to you, but we don't suck to a lot of different people. It's like when you have like the level of immaturity to be like, no way, Sean Gordon Murphy, we do more than blah 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 blah. And you're like, whoa, ramp it down, right? Let
Yeah.
the work, let the whatever it is speak for itself. Are you as successful as you say? Are you as good as you say? Then the work will eventually shine through. But the fact that you're protesting that hard, maybe there's something going on there, man.
I mean, that's one of the things that also, started Comics Gate, like back in the day, where Zach said, "Yeah, I don't think these people are doing their job. They're just going out for milkshakes." And people are like, "Wait, how the fuck would you say that? Why would you say that to a woman? Like, she's doing her best."
I mean,
Meanwhile, they're
not
like
just
basic
that, but I
spell
think in
checkers.
general, yeah, I think not just that, but in general, people, I don't know what's turned. I don't know what corner. I really believe, Bale, that for 5 years there, I was sort of abducted by aliens, and then I come back, and
Good.
then suddenly everything. Uh, and I don't mean to pick on Tumblr, but everything kind of had this sort of like turn for the worse
Oh
when
yeah.
people started taking their Tumblr softness and putting it all over the place, you know.
Yeah,
And
that's the thing. It's not just a meme. Like Tumblr softness and Tumblr art. It's not a meme.
no, I mean that I'm picking on it. That's probably not very fair. What I mean is that there was a point in time when people could take criticism, harsh or not. You stick your chin out and be like, okay, cool. I'll just whatever. Who cares, right? So for Zach to come out and say like, I don't think these are very good books, or look at these people just kind of what is it? What did he say? Like fake geek girl or whatever it is.
Oh yeah, I
Like
fucking love that
such an
phrase.
innocuous comment, but then somehow that gets leveraged into, oh, that's a high level of misogyny. That you don't believe that women can do these. Is that how it was? I think that's how it was being
Yeah,
leveraged, right? That
that that
conversation.
that yeah,
And you're
that's how
like,
it
I
spiraled.
don't think that was a commentary. It just happens to be a woman in that space. But if a comic book sucks, independent of gender, it should be called out.
Yeah.
Um, and that's unfortunate because that was just I thought a small criticism to be like, oh gosh, you guys made an entire thing out of this nothing thing. But that's me, right? That's the generation that I come from. To be like, eh, whatever, go do this thing, right? Oh, that you think that I suck? Cool, I'll go. Okay, you're not the person I'm going to spend any energy on trying to convince, right? I'll just go be good.
Yeah, I mean,
But instead,
wasn't
there
it like
can't be
that?
any.
Wasn't it like that back in the day where you'd show your profile to like Marvel editors and they're like, "Yeah, you're not good enough. We have another guy who's like just as good or better, and he lives down the street." and
Yeah, for
and you
sure.
had to take the train for an hour.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's a again, it's a different generation that I don't often align with because it shows uh, a level of oversensitivity and softness and there's times for it. Obviously, there's times for sensitivity and empathy, but there are times when it's just like I think you're just looking to get pissed off. I think you're just
Yeah.
looking to like do something to get mad about because there's nothing else going on in your day. That's overly harsh, overly general, but it doesn't make it any less true. And
Yeah,
what's
I think.
worse, it's when it's being backed up by actual working professionals. That's when I'm
Oh
like,
yeah,
knock it off.
when that gets backed up, even when you know it's like 90% just forced backing, you're like, eye roll groan, cue the whole cue that whole algorithm. You're like, oh come on, just you're above that.
Yeah, you would hope so, but again, I forget. Like, far be it for me to dictate how you conduct yourself, publicly and professionally. But there are times when I'm really surprised.
It is very weird. You know what? I'm
Yeah,
not surprised about the absolute astonishing art quality of Argentina, and I'm loving these live field shoulder
nice,
pads.
nice. The fucking roll, the what do you call it? The way that transitioned right into Arcathena talk, that felt very natural and organic.
I
Thanks to it.
know, right?
Mm. Yeah, no,
What
I
character
think
was it? Cable who used to have those kind of shoulder pads most of the time, or
yeah,
was it
which I
like any?
loved. Again, it's what I loved about that particular era of comics,
Oh
and
yeah, I fucking
you
love
can
it.
agree or disagree, that's all up to you, and everybody has their subjective taste. But what I loved about those era of comics is just that it was not embarrassed of itself, you know? It was not apologetic of the kinds of stories that it was telling. And was there a I believe that there was a pretty voracious readership who wanted to see it, who wanted to see like big action movie back before any of this was financially tenable. Like there were people who wanted to read those big kind of stories. And and I think that's what in part, that's what I wanted to capture with Arc Athena. It's just like say thank you very much to that era of comics, but not necessarily be an exact carbon copy of it, right? And Cable was one of those people. Like, there's no conceivable reason why Cable should have had, you know, massive shoulder pads like that. But it just looked cool. It
Yeah,
was fun to draw. It was
yeah,
fun to look at. It was
it's
fun to be like, oh man, that's that's way above and beyond anything that is quote unquote real or cinematically possible. But it was just fun to look at. And who
yeah,
cares? It's
and
comics.
yeah, and they were tailored to kids back then, and kids intrinsically knew that this is quote unquote oh bullshit, but it's fun. It's supposed to be, and we've lost that
Right.
because like energy isn't lost; it's transferred. And when the artist is having fun drawing the pouches, the shoulder pads, the big action pieces, it gets transferred to
Sure.
the page and then to the reader. And he's like, "Oh, look at this fucking guy with the shoulder pads
Oh,
and
sure.
the 50 toaster guns and whatever."
Yeah, but it's not to say that that's all comics can encapsulate, but at
Oh
least
yeah.
in this particular case, it's what I liked seeing in comics. So, and I often I don't get a chance to see that as much anymore. But more importantly, I took the bitching and moaning, stuff that you and I are effectively doing like right now. Like I took that off of the table because I got sick of hearing myself talk about it. And instead, I just said, I'm going to go draw the thing that I'm saying that I don't get a chance to see. Even if I'm inaccurate. I'm not saying that I'm 100% accurate in my assessment of like, they don't make these kinds of comics the way they used to, yada yada yada, right? And some people would have a tendency to agree with me, but rather than that, saying like, you know what, rather than complaining, I'm just gonna go draw it, and that's what Arc Athena turned out to be.
Yeah, man. I mean, it's the thing Todd McFarlane used to say. I mean, he keeps saying, but he did back in the 90s and keeps doing. Like, if there's a cool thing I want and it ain't there, I'ma go make it myself.
Yeah, that's it. That's a pretty good attitude to have, and it shouldn't be. And I don't know what it is, but when I say a statement like that, similar to Sean Gordon Murphy saying like, I don't think editors are doing quite what we've come to expect editor, or at least what he's come to expect editors to do, which is actually sit there and pour through narrative and make sure everything is aligned to our baseline understanding of characters and pre-existing stories. Like when I say something like I don't see these kinds of comics, or I don't believe that these comics are being represented in mainstream, so I'll go do it myself. That's not a slight towards you. People take such
Yeah.
offense, like they
I mean,
immediately become defensive of this thing, and I'm like, children, fucking children, to
yeah,
say like it's not saying that it's not doing that. I cannot possibly have like the big enough eyeball to see everything that I'm having a criticism over. What I'm saying is based on what I've seen, and it's not everything. I don't think this is being represented well, so I'm gonna go do it. And if you think that you are representing that well, it's not a slight against you. Just go and you've won already. You're doing it already. Congratulations. You are the example and the exception. Congratulations. But don't sit there and be like, well, what the fuck does he know he's talking about? We're doing this on X, Y, and Z. But I'm like, cool, man.
yeah.
Have at it. Congratulations. That's a high five. That's a high five to you. It is not a direct slight towards you. It may be an accidental slight towards you, and it speaks more towards my ignorance than your lack of capability.
I think those situations happen because the people who get all uppity about such conversations,
Hmm.
maybe on some deep unconscious level, do know that they're shit at their job. If you didn't feel guilty, you wouldn't go act all defenseless about it, right? If you were confident in your
Yeah.
work, you'd just be like, you know what? Yeah, fuck you, we are doing the thing.
Yeah, but that's, that's often a trait that, confident and successful people have, right? That thing that you just captured right now, right? Which is like, fuck you, just gonna do it. Like, that's a trait that is often inherently inside successful people. When you have insecure, unsuccessful people,
Yeah.
or even still insecure, successful people, oftentimes that's what ends up rearing its ugly head, which is, I can't believe they said this about me directly, indirectly, and therefore I must go on the attack, right? And this makes me feel bad, or whatever it is. Oh boy.
Yeah, people are fucking children these days. But yeah,
They can be, and I'm not
that
guiltless when it comes to that. I can act like a fucking immature guy, you know?
I mean, we're doing it right now.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean,
We're not being overly defensive about stupid things.
yeah.
Hey,
I think
that
it's very
that era of
natural that they
comics,
do.
when I see people doing fan art of like characters from
Yeah,
comics, especially
yeah.
especially when they're like Eastern people, like Korean, Japanese, yada yada, people who didn't necessarily grow up with these characters, it's always the older version. It's always the 90s, the 80s X-Men. It's not today's Wolverine. It's like, Jim Lee's Wolverine. And I've been
Which bugs the
noticing
hell
that
out of
for
me because I'm not a big fan of that Cyclops that Jim Lee drew. I can't stand the fucking Y harness.
But yeah, but it's something
What's
I've
it?
noticed. I'm like, these guys they just draw that, and I was wondering why so? Like, why not the new Cyclops that looks like a fascist and acts like a separatist? Why is
So
it
here's the
that
thing, and I have a
Cyclops?
theory about that, okay? Because when you think of American comics, for better or worse, globally, people think of superheroes, right?
Yeah,
Oftentimes, the most recent incarnations of these characters, there's nothing superheroic about them at all.
yeah,
When you think of how Jim, whatever it is, like, old versions of Superman, Batman, X-Men, Fantastic Four, what have you, all of them were presented to be aspirational and larger than life with human frailties, but ultimately still superheroes, right? Most recent comics, and this is not indicative of everything, so please put down your pitchforks. Oftentimes, they lean way too hard on the non superheroic side.
yeah.
They
But
over index on frailty and how these characters are just not meant to be heroic at all. And that is a tragedy. So, to answer your question, I guess, at least in theory, there's a reason why whenever they make a Capcom video game, they rarely go with fascist Cyclops, you know?
yeah,
They rarely, they rarely go. They often opt for the big heroic versions of them, which is Jim Lee, which is the most influential. I think the sticky version of the visuals of these characters, because who wants to see a bunch of guys in cosplay?
yeah. I can go to my local convention and see that. But here's the thing, though, Master Kane, how are people going to connect with a character if they don't find them relatable? I mean,
Yeah, yeah. See
how are
that
you
that
going to?
term that term in a untrained hand really is a ding. It's like, I don't know, that term, like, the reason why these characters are amazing is because they're relatable, and I think in real craftsmen's hands that makes a lot of sense. When you have people who are not just guided by relatability, but also lacking in objectivity, and more importantly, they have a tendency to go towards advocacy,
Oh
and I
yeah.
use that term very softly. You get a whole slew of interpretations of characters that are misrepresentative of how the audience have had an understanding of them, right? You don't, and that's the reason why I'm careful to always, especially when it comes to Arcathena related characters, I don't need you to relate to them. I need you to understand them, right? Like, I don't have to have relatability. If it is in there, great. I'm thankful that I managed to somehow capture that level of relatability from character to reader. But often I just need to do the work in order for you to understand why they're making the decisions that you make. Some are So why they're making the decisions that they're making, right? Why they're acting the way they're acting. Some are really superficial, like, okay, I understand why they act like jerks, because in an ensemble cast you can only spend so much time doing backstory. But especially with like the main characters, at least in this particular arc, between Gristle and Divana, you have a clear understanding of why they're making their decisions, right? So that's not relatability. That's just you understanding
Yeah.
as characters. I've done my work so you understand them as characters.
Yeah, Devana needs to get her likes up, and Gristle needs to do the job.
Right, right.
I mean, that's the it's a very abbreviated version, but that's pretty much what Arc Athena is. It's like the social
Hmm.
media team and the Black Ops team. It's like the X-Men and the X-Force.
Yeah, they never leverage X Force that well, in that sense,
Yeah, sadly.
There's
I think the
yeah,
last
that's
good
unfortunate.
incarnation of X-Force was Rick Remenders.
Oh sure,
And that was a decade ago, I think.
yeah, that's the other thing that really sort of lit the fire under me back then. Not so much in recent times, and I have to say that if Rick hadn't turned me down, and I didn't know anything about this, I only found out about it just as recently as a few months ago. But I didn't know that Rick was sort of like drummed out of the mainstream industry.
Oh
You know,
yeah.
I didn't know that he was sort of like pressured to. I don't even know what he did. To make people turn on him as they did. Like I don't. I never found out. I never really got to the root of it. But ultimately, I don't care. Right. What I knew was that Rick did a book called Uncanny X Force, which I loved. And to his credit, I was trying to tease him back. You know, I was trying to say, hey, man, do one more X-Men related thing or one more Marvel related thing, not knowing anything of the history, anything that he was going through at the time, you know? But to his credit,
He must
Rick
have
was
thought you were like the
was
biggest
smart enough.
dick.
What happened?
He must have thought you were the biggest dick while you were trying to
I
do
know. It
that.
was like, what the fuck? You're asking me to do this thing. People were, came at me with fists and knives. What the hell are you? What are you asking? I felt so bad after way after the fact. Anyway, point is, when I was asking him to do it, for a brief second, he actually thought about it.
You
After all
almost
of
had
that,
him.
whatever public pressure that he went under, he actually thought about it, only to call me out later, which is like, Eric, I know you, dude. We'll get 6 issues or 4 issues into a 6 issue miniseries, and you're just gonna, you're gonna lose interest. To his credit, he was right, right?
Hey, at least he knew you.
Yeah, I don't know, man, but I always think about that time when he was drawing. He had written Uncanny X Force for Jerome, and I thought, this is, oh my gosh, how fucking good is this book?
I mean, yeah, you guys did a whole book club episode on it with you, Cola, and was it John Amaro also there?
Yep, yep, yeah, that was
Yeah,
good.
that was an
That was
awesome
good
ass
X
book.
Men books, dude. That
Yep.
that lived up to the promise, I thought.
Yeah, and I think Craig did. I think it was like a year or two ago. I saw something on his Twitter. It was like a tweet long, some long form of commentary where he was like, "Yeah, Marvel wanted to do Inhumans. They basically forced me to write Inhumans, for which I had no ideas and no story. But they were like, hey, you gotta do this." And that's one of the driving
Yeah, yeah,
forces that led him out the industry. He was like, you know what, fuck all y'all. I'm gonna do what I wanna do.
yeah. Good for him. I think in as far as that is concerned, he's way ahead of the curve, right? Compared to everybody else. And being that he is ahead of the curve, he's already established himself as Rick that doesn't need mainstream, and good for him. I don't know why there's in most recent times when people are evacuating Marvel for like Substack deals or what have you. Like, I don't know
Yeah.
why that's such a weird revelation to people. Ooh, people are leaving books, and they're leaving #1 titles and yada yada yada. Maybe because in Rick's case he was sort of ousted, forgive the term, but like he left not necessarily because he wanted to, but because there was public pressure to do so. But it's like, if you're a creator, a writer, artist, what have you, of any worth, that you are there's a shelf life to you doing those books.
Oh yeah.
There's no more. I don't think there's very very few instances where the Claremont game plan is a thing that people will strive for nowadays, right? People always hope to graduate to their own thing, but you would hope that they graduate to their own thing as they're leveraging their popularity on these mainstream books. You would hope that they left it better than they found it, Not just because, oh, I'm just biding my time before I leave to go do whatever it is that I end up eventually doing, right? You actually are an additive to the legacy, but
I
I
have not
suspect some
seen
people
that
don't have that.
lately. I mean, there's been this
Say again?
commentary. I have not seen that lately, and there's been this commentary mostly by Zach that people are just leveraging their time in comics while they're waiting on their Hollywood deals, which
Well,
is
I
understandable
know I
since
don't know. Like,
comics is
it's
such a
clear
small
that
thing.
Zach reads more comics than I do, mainstream comics than I do. It's just, I think it's his passion, if not an ancillary portion of his online business.
Oh
But
yeah,
it is to say that of the things that I've seen, I'm like, oh, that's not representative of the characters at all. And I haven't seen everything, but that's not representative of the characters at all, as we've come to understand them historically. Again, as that's no slight to the creator that did it. The only criticism there is like, how come you don't understand these characters? That's more of a criticism, or at least if I'm to hold somebody accountable and responsible, it's the editorial staff.
yeah, it's leadership. Like, I don't know. Don't they have like a Bible of, hey, this is who this character is. These are like a
Mm,
character sheet. Like these are his traits. This is his character and whatnot. And
mm, mm,
and I've seen writers as recently as like a couple of months ago with Tom Taylor writing Nightwing. Like
mm.
that doesn't sound nowhere near the Nightwing I've been
Well,
reading
see,
for
that's
a
the
few
thing. It's
years.
like, I don't know. I don't. You don't ever want to hamstring creators coming in and having a take on their characters. You want to help elevate the spirit of what they're trying to do. Like, okay, so I want to shake up the family by having, I don't know what his current storyline is, but like, I want to be able to shake up that understanding of the universe that is Batman by doing X, Y, and Z, and I'm going to do it through this character. Totally cool. But I think, a good editor steps in and goes, yes, but that kind of breaks things, right? They are supposed to be sort of one of the points of reference from an IP slash company perspective to go like, yeah, but that breaks things. I understand that we can still hit those notes that you want to hit without having to break something, because at the end of the day, this thing needs to survive you, right? This needs to go beyond just your run and extend, hopefully, for the next decade and decades plus, right? So we're not going to do that. We're going to do this instead. And that's responsible leadership. And if he's hitting notes that don't land very well, I don't know his work, but if he's hitting notes that doesn't land very well with the understanding of that legacy, then that's not on Tom Taylor.
Yeah,
He should know
there's
better, but since it's clear that he doesn't know better, then that ultimately uh, falls onto leadership.
yeah. I think from my own perspective, I will first blame the creator. Like, hey, stupid, how do you not know any better? And then it's like the leadership,
Well,
like,
that's
hey,
natural.
hey, even stupider, how do you not know how to steer this stupid ship?
It's natural. But that goes back to what you were talking about earlier, which, like, they asked Remender to do, Inhumans. He didn't know
Yeah,
anything about it. You can't expect them to know everything, right? So again, that's why you have that point of reference. You have that sort of touchstone of safety in the editorial staff to be able to rein you in. You have to trust them.
yeah. The editorial has to be as sturdy as HGH is here on the page.
That's, what do you call it? I think that's what Sean was referring to. Like,
Yeah,
how can you possibly expect to, hold editorial accountable when they themselves don't hold each other accountable? When they don't hold themselves accountable to the jobs that they're supposed to be doing. And when you hold that mirror, as that's a pretty harsh piece of
yeah,
criticism. I think part of it goes back to what you said, which is there must be some nugget of truth in there for them to protest so hard. You couple that with people's just overall disdain for Sean.
yeah.
Sean's
Poor
a
guy.
Sean's a pretty polarizing guy, so I wasn't surprised. I'm not surprised that people came back and pushed back on whatever it is that he's saying.
Yeah, and we've been talking about editors not doing their job for like quite a while now. But what about editors that do? do their job? What about your editor? What about the other secret of Arc Athena, the backup
Sure,
team, the
sure.
backbone to the mecha suit that is this comic?
Yeah, sure. I mean, talking about, editor doing their job, and this is how I remember when I first reached out to Joe after the fact, after he took on the gig, right? I managed to convince him slowly, subversively. But when we had our conversation, that initial sort of introductory conversation about what the story was going to be, what my intent was, what I had the ideas that I had for the characters, and effectively their speaking voices, and their attitudes towards the theme. We talked about theme for a long time, and then I remember Joe saying something very specific. He says, "Eric, I'm not in the business of having you change things. I'm there to sort of help massage the ideas to the pre-existing pages because I already had 3 issues in the can at that point. And he's like, Eric, I'm not going to have you change pages. I'm going to do my very best to sort of like be as invisible as possible. And to which I push it back a little, and I said, Joe, if it's missing, then it's missing. I'm happy to draw the page again. Or I'm happy to
Yeah.
put additive into the whole thing because if it doesn't make sense, then that's robbing the reader of the experience, or at the very least, the intent. I don't want to come off as, completely ignorant to my own story. So please hold me accountable. And to that end, he's lived up to that. He's always like, Eric, that makes sense. Like, there's plenty of times when we're going over script and he says, Eric, that makes a lot of sense in your head. But because people can't hear the volume and the nature by which you're having these characters talk, we have to be that much more deliberate about making sure that it reads correctly. So this is how I think you mean it, and this is how it's sounding. And yeah, again, to his credit, he holds me accountable. And I think that's what a good editor does, on top of many other things that Joe does on a day to day, week to week.
Yeah, I've heard nothing but good things about Joe Albino Thunderbuns Fulton. Not only just as a guy, but
Yeah,
also as an editor. And we do need editors, because especially if you're like a rookie like me who's going to do his first book and you're both writing and drawing, like get yourself an editor. Don't shoot yourself in the foot on like the very first step of the marathon.
yeah. Well, it's what do you call it, right? In a creator-owned space, I think it's weird that what's the best way to put it? Like, there's plenty of people who went forward with their projects, not realizing the value of an editor, and it becomes sobering super quick that they ultimately really needed one, right? Or
Oh yeah.
there have been people who moved forward with their projects advocating that they don't need an editor. They actually knew of the editorial spot, right? And they said, I don't need that. And it
Ooh.
still shows up in their work that they did, you know? So there's two versions, which is one who went forward ignorant of the necessity of that space, and the other version thinking that they knew of the editorial spot, but said, I can do without, and it still shows up. It's like, oh, it's clear that you did, right? Because an editor, a good one anyway, would know how to plus one, plus 10, plus 20 your ideas. And the things that you think that we could read between the lines don't come out at all. So unless you've had a really good, I'm talking about a history of making these, or a history of writing in which you are that skilled, that adept at understanding, oh yeah, I think I landed this. I'm always a proponent of putting people in a place in which they can only help your book, and that's just not editorial, right? That's like coloring and
Oh yeah, that's coloring,
like with
lettering.
Jules. Yeah, like if I showed you some of the stuff Jules is coloring right now for issue 2, like the only reason that reads as well as it does, regardless of my intent, is because Jules is understanding my intent and then being an additive to that, right? And that's what good team members do. That's what good craftspeople do.
Yeah,
Get an
and
editor.
everything. Yeah, get an editor, stupid.
Yeah, get an editor.
Yeah, I wish the comic industry
You're
would do
not
the
as
same.
good at you're not as good at writing as you think you are. Trust me.
Yeah, yeah, it's needed. Like editorial is needed, especially nowadays, and then in the mainstream. Where's Jim Shooter? What's he doing? Because as much as people badmouth him and call him like, oh, he was terrible, he was making people work and yada yada yada, it looks like we need someone like him right now, at least in mainstream. Someone who not only schedules your book to come out on time, but actually keeps you honest.
Well, yeah, I don't know if in this climate of, in this climate of sensitivity, Jim Shooter would be allowed to excel, right?
Which is the
There's always
saddest part.
processes in place that would hamstring him from what his goal would be. And it's not to say Jim couldn't adapt if he ultimately wanted to, but the success that he exhibited and those titles they exhibited back in the day all came from a very specific generation that has stronger chin for what Shooter did.
Yeah, well, if I were leadership of DC, and since I'm Slavic, I don't care about the the sensitivity crowd. Just hey, yeah, you either get beaten into shape or get thrown.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that also falls down to whomever it is that Jim had to answer to, right? If what their if what their goal is to make sure that they have the best product on the market, and Jim is the one that is delivering that, then you would give him as much of a runway and accommodation that would allow for that to happen. If what you're worried about are sensitivities, right, and public perception of how people think of your company, and you take too much of your too much into account what social media is screaming about, all 3 or 5% of them that don't even buy your books.
Oh yeah, I saw that infographic last night from Perch. Was Perch or
Yeah.
was it
So if
Zach
you're
today?
looking at
It was
yeah,
hilarious.
if you're looking at that and saying like that's how we're gonna run our companies through, public opinion, then good luck to you.
Yeah, it's horrendous. It's probably not as horrendous as picking an ensemble for your very first book. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
something you advise me as well. Like if you're gonna do a book, especially your first one, don't go with a team book.
Yeah, don't do a team book. It's really, really stupid because it's a lot to draw all at once, all at the same time. And especially, don't do a team book of like 6 issues. That is freaking bonkers. Also, don't do a team book of 6 issues in an alien invasion. Don't do that. Do
And also,
everything that's opposite to that.
don't do a team book that's a team of six and there are two teams in it and it starts with an alien invasion.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Because
Don't do that.
if it were like just
Do
The Arc Athena side, you'd be like, okay, 6 characters, you go just grit your teeth. But no, it's two teams and an alien invasion.
don't do anything. Don't do anything that's Arcathena like because it's a recipe for disaster. All right, I'm getting the high sign from the wife to go and be a family man for the early morning
That is
bail, so
awesome.
I'm gonna excuse myself.
And I will let you go. Best regards
Alrighty.
to the family, to the kids,
Yeah. Yeah,
and
yeah,
and to the chat, for which I apologize again for boomering 40 minutes of this.
yeah. Don't sweat it. As
I'll
long
do
as you
better, I
have it kind of
promise.
recorded, well, you can. It's always ways to edit it together. So, anyway, have a great morning or afternoon in your case, evening, and I'll talk to you later.
Have a great morning, and I'll see you soon.
See ya. Bye.
That was Derek Kennedy, everybody. Go back, Arcathine, and before we end the stream, I will play the trailer one more time, and then I'm gonna go too, because I boomered it enough already.